So today I'll be introducing you and sharing you about the introduction to mountaineering. So I'll be talking about terminology, then history of mountaineering. So before doing so, we need to differentiate what is hiking, trekking, and mountaineering. Okay? Hiking. The easiest of the three is hiking. You walk on well-marked trails or easy to moderate difficulty. These are usually half day to 1 day tours. And then the terrain varies from relatively flat to steep. Okay, most hiking tours take anywhere from 2 to 8 hours round trip. You usually finish it the same place that you started, either from hiking a loop or returning the same way. Then for hiking tours, you need a minimal equipment compared to trekking and mountaineering. A hiking trip can take you anywhere from a few hours to several days. And as a rule, no technical knowledge is necessary. Some basic navigation techniques and a good fitness level will be more than enough to take you from start to finish. In general, hiking can be practiced year-round except on winters. Okay? While trekking, refer to walks that take place on wilder and often more difficult trails. So that's a difference. More difficult trails. In general, trails are also characterized by being longer and in more remote locations. Then trekking is between hiking and mountaineering. So it can be varied. No? And then although it's a more similar to hiking, the difference being that treks are longer than hikes. So it's more than 8 hours. It can last 2 or more days. Then alternatively, when trekking in some locations, you may have the option to stay at the small lodges. So here you have the opportunity to stay on lodges, mountain huts, or tea huts, even bed and breakfast along the way. Okay? Then trekking is more challenging than hiking because you will be walking for multiple days in a row. So it is very important that these can be differentiated so that it can work. These words can be used interchangeably, but you know the difference once you're already trekking. Okay. Then mountaineering. Mountaineering is defined as the sports of climbing mountains and may also refer to as alpinism, especially in Europe. Especially in Europe, it's called not mountaineering, but more on alpinism. Okay? It generally involves a greater technical difficulty and requires specialized equipment, including harness, helmet, belay device, crampons. Here we don't have the snow, so we don't have to use crampons. No? But we'll be using in our training. We'll be using belay devices, helmet, yeah, perhaps in the training. Then harness, of course, we will do some training about using the harness. Of the three, mountaineering is by far the most challenging. It's more of technical variation of trekking that takes you to higher peaks, often to ones that over 5,000 meters and above sea level. Well, in the Philippines, we don't have 5,000 meters mountain. No? These are also multi-day, so it's not a one day trip or 2 day trekking. It's more than. No? In our training, we will be trekking 3 days or more. No? And then in addition, in some locations, you need to be strong enough to be able to endure long hours of ascending with low levels of oxygen. And hopefully we don't experience this in 2,000 meters or 3,000 meters. Okay? But before proceeding, we should know what mountain means. Okay? It is a natural elevation of Earth's surface, rising more or less abruptly to a summit and attaining an altitude greater than that of a hill. So it's higher than a hill, usually greater than 2,000 feet. Okay, a large mass of something resembling this as in shape or size. So we know how to differentiate what's a hill and what's a mountain. Then also most geologists classify a mountain as a landform that rises at least 1,000 feet or more above its surrounding area. A mountain range is a series of chain of mountains that are close together. Now, about the history of mountaineering, so about the worldview. So the history of mountaineering, the first climb is around on April 2026. Famous Italian poet Petrarch, no, Francesco Petrarca, climbed to the summit of Mount Ventoux, overlooking the Bay of Marseille, claiming to be inspired by the Philip of Macedon's ascent of Mount Hemo, making him the first known alpinist, because it is in Europe. They climb because simply for the view. Okay, so at the right of the presentation, that's Mount Ventoux. And then also in Poland, the Sineska, one of the first European mountains visited by tourists. So this history comes from the on the western point of view. Then now we're talking about the golden age, the emergence of mountaineering as a sport. Who made mountaineering fashionable in Britain? No? Here, the beginning of mountaineering as a sport in the UK is generally dated to the ascent of Wetterhorn in 1854 by English mountaineer Sir Alfred Wills, who made mountaineering fashionable in Britain. This inaugurated what became known as the Golden Age of Alpinism, with the first mountaineering club, the Alpine Club, being founded in 1857. So some of the prominent figures of the period includes Lord Francis Douglas, Florence Gofford Grove, Charles Hudson, E. S. Kennedy, William Matthews, A. W. Moore, Leslie Stephen, Francis Fox Tackett, John Tyndall, Horace Walker, and Edward Whymper. Volume guides of the era includes Christian Almer, then Jacob Underedge, Melchior Underedge, J. J. Bannon, Michael Cross, and Johann Zumthor. I hope I pronounced it right. Okay? So one of the most dramatic events was the spectacular first ascent of the Matterhorn in 1865 by a party led by English illustrator Edward Whymper, in which four of the party members fell to their deaths. This ascent is generally regarded as making the end of the mountaineering golden age. By this point, the sport of mountaineering had largely reached its modern form, with a body of professional guides, equipment, and fixed guidelines. So here, it shows the importance of equipments, no, to be part of the mountaineering experiences of the mountaineering history. When they climb now, they require guides, equipments, and fixed guidelines. So the so right now here, Jacques Balmat, at the side of the these together with Horace Benedict du du Saussure, the father of alpinism, have a monument in Chamonix. He said that I was desperately anxious to see at close quarters the great Alpine summit, which looks so majestic from the top of other mountains. Okay? Modern mountaineering is said to have been begun on August 8, 786, when Michael Picard, a doctor from Chamonix, and Jacques Balmat, a farmer, reached the summit of 1,810 meters Mont Blanc, the highest mountain in Western Europe. The seeds had been sown a quarter of a century earlier in 1760 when Horace Benedict de Saussure he offered a reward to the first person to climb it. De Saussure wrote extensively about his travels. His influence generated a great deal of interest in climbing Mont Blanc. He climbed it himself the year after Picard and Balmat with a party of 17 people, including Balmat as a guide. Mountain climbing as a hobby and pastime for tourists was born, and Saussure can justify be called the father of mountaineering. Another important figure in mountaineering is Henriette d'Angeville. Okay, so mountaineering is not just for men. Okay, Henriette Angeville was a descendant of French aristocratic family after her father's death in 1827, she settled in Geneva. An avid walker, for a long time, she longed to climb Mont Blanc and finally did so in 1838, becoming the first woman since Maria Paradis in 1808 to climb Europe's highest mountain. Now, we're talking about expansion around the world, so it's not only limited in Europe. Mountaineering in the Americas became popular in the 1800s. Okay? In North America, Pikes Peak, around 14,000 feet in the Colorado Rockies, discovered in 1806, was first climbed by Edwin James and two others in 1820. Lower than Pikes Peak, the heavily glaciated Fremont Peak, around 30,000 feet in Wyoming, was thought to be the tallest mountain in the Rockies when it was first climbed by John C. Fremont and two others in 1842. Then Pico de Orizaba, around 18,000 feet, the tallest peak in Mexico and third tallest in North America, was first climbed by U.S. military personnel, which included William F. Reynolds and half a dozen other climbers in 1848. Heavily glaciated and more technical climbs in the North American were not achieved until the late 19th and early 20th centuries. Again, in 1897, Mount Sinai Elias, around 18,000 feet on the Alaska-Yukon border, was summited by the Duke of Abruzzi and party. But it was not until 1913 that Mount McKinley, around 20,000 feet, the tallest peak in North America, was successfully climbed by Hudson Stuck. Mount Logan, about around 19,000 feet, the tallest peak in Canada, was first summited by half a dozen climbers in 1925 in an expedition that took more than 2 months. Again, in 1879 to 1880, the exploration of the highest Andes in South America began when English mountaineer Edward Whymper climbed Chimborazo. It's around 20,000 feet on the height. Then explored the mountain of Ecuador. The Cordillera between Chile and Argentina was visited by Paul Gusfeld in 1883, who ascended the volcano Maipo and attempted to climb the tallest mountain in the Americas, Aconcagua, that same year, but was unsuccessful. The summit of Aconcagua was finally reached on January 14, 1897, by Swiss mountaineer Matthias Zurbriggen during an expedition led by Edward Fitzgerald that began in December 1896. The Andes of Bolivia were first explored by Sir William Martin Conway in 1898, who later visited the mountains of Tierra del Fuego on the southern tip of South America. So we just finished talking about the Europe. We explored the Americas. Now we'll go to another part of the world. It took until the 19th century by European explorers to penetrate Africa. On Mount Kilimanjaro in Africa was climbed in 1889 by Austrian mountaineer Ludwig Purschler and German geologist Hans Meyer. Mount Kenya in 1899 by Harold Mackinder, and a peak of Ruwenzori by H.J. Moore in 1900s. Focus shift towards exploration of other ranges such as the Pyrenees and the Caucasus Mountains. The latter owed much to the initiative of D.W. Freshfield, who was the first man to conquer mountains. The latter owned to conquer the summit of Mount Kazbek. Most of its great peaks were successfully conquered by the late 1800s. So here, we'll go to another continent. In New Zealand, southwestern Alps were first visited in 1882 by the Irish mountaineer Reverend William Sporswood Green, and on December 25, 1894, Kiwi mountaineer Tom Fife and his party summited Aoraki or Mount Cook. By the turn of the 20th century, mountaineering has acquired a more international flavor. The last frontier. Now we'll go to the Himalayas. Okay? So this is called the last frontier. The last and greatest mountain range was at the Himalayas in Central Asia. They had initially been surveyed by the British Empire for military and strategic reasons. In 1892, Sir William Martin Conway explored the Karakoram Himalayas and climbed a peak of 20,000 feet. In 1895, Albert Mummery died while attempting Nangal Parbat, while in 1899 D.W. Freshfield took an expedition to the snowy regions of Sikkim. In 1899 to 1903, 1906, and 1908, American mountaineer Mrs. Fanny Bullock Workman, one of the first professional female mountaineers, made ascent in the Himalayas, including one of Nunkun Peaks, around 23,000 feet. A number of Gurkha sepoys were trained as expert mountaineers by Charles Granville Bruce, and a good deal of exploration was accomplished by them. Here in 1902, the Eckenstein-Crowley expedition, led by English mountaineer Oscar Eckenstein and English occultist Aleister Crowley, was the first to attempt to scale Chogaree, now known as K2 in the west. They reached 22,000 feet before turning back due to weather and other mishaps. Undaunted, in 1905, Crowley led the first expedition to Kangchenjunga, the third highest mountain in the world. Four members of the party were killed in an avalanche, and they failed to reach the summit. Eckenstein was also a pioneer in developing a new equipment and climbing methods. He started using shorter ice axes, which could be used single-handed, designed the modern crampons, and improved on the nail patterns used for climbing boots. So again, remember his name, Oscar Eckenstein, because of his contribution in the mountaineering field. By 1950s, all the 8,000ers but two had been climbed, starting with Annapurna in 1950 by Maurice Herzog and Louis Lachenal on the 1950 French Annapurna expedition. The last great peak was the highest of them all, Mount Everest. The British had made several attempts in the 1920s. The 1922 expedition reached 8,320 meters before being aborted on the third summit attempt after an avalanche killed 7 porters. The 1924 expedition saw another height record achieved but still failed to reach the summit, with confirmation when George Mallory and Andrew Irvine disappeared on the final attempt. The summit was finally reached on May 29, 1953 by Sir Edmund Hillary and Tenzing Norgay from the south side and Nepal. Just a few months later, Hermann Bolt made the first ascent of Nanga Parbat, around 8,000, a siege-style expedition culminating in the last 1,300 meters walking alone, being under the influence of drugs, a pervitin based on the stimulant methamphetamine used by soldiers during World War II, then padutin and tea from coca leaves. I have tasted the coca leaves, no, when I climb Cotopaxi and also Chimborazo in Ecuador. Sorry, I didn't try to reach the summit. Then K2, the second highest mountain in the world, the highest peak in the world, was first scaled in 1954 by Lino Lacidelli and Achille Compagnoni. In 1964, the final 8,000er to be climbed was Shishapangma, the lowest of all the 8,000-meter peaks. Then, mountaineering has become increasingly commercial in the past several decades, especially concerning the world's highest peaks and most difficult climbs, although many mountaineers resent the commercialization of a certain ranges. These expeditions bring a strong source of of income to mountain communities, especially in the Himalayas. With that, I'll be leaving you with this saying: the hardest mountain to climb is the one within.